2, 1, 0. All engine running. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The words, "one small step for a man, one giant leap for humanity," are forever etched into the annals of time. Neil Armstrong was easily the biggest poster boy for the United States space triumph after he famously became the first man to walk the moon, and then he left the world a cryptic message. Renowned podcaster Joe Rogan seems to have figured it out. What did Joe Rogan figure out about the moon travel? What does he know? Join us as we explore Joe Rogan's dissection of the message Neil Armstrong left before his death, the first man to walk the moon. Neil Armstrong is no person that needs an introduction. He remarkably made history by becoming the first person to ever walk the moon. Neil Armstrong was born on the 5th of August, 1930, less than 60 meters from the Wright brothers' workshop. The son of Viola Louise and Stephen Koenig Armstrong, he was of German English, Scots-Irish, and Scottish descent. He had a younger sister, June, and a younger brother, Dean. His father was an auditor for the Ohio state government, and the family moved around repeatedly, living in 16 towns in just 14 years. Born to fly, his love for flying grew during this time, having started at the age of 2 when his father took him to the Cleveland air races. When he was 5 or 6, he experienced his first flight in Warren, Ohio, when he and his father took a ride in a Ford Tri-Motor, also known as the Tin Goose. At the age of 16, he earned his pilot's license even before he had his driver's license. In 1947, he attended Purdue University on a naval scholarship, studying aeronautical engineering. As part of his scholarship, the Navy trained him as a fighter pilot in Florida. His college studies were interrupted by the Korean War, where he flew 78 combat missions. His aircraft, the F-9 Panther jet, was one of the first jet fighters to launch from a carrier. After finishing college, Armstrong went to work for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which would later become the National Aeronautics Space Commission, NASA. In 1958, this mild-mannered kid from Ohio made his name as one of the most daring and skilled test pilots at NASA's Flight Research Center, which is now renamed after him. At the Edwards Air Force Base in California, during his 7 years as a test pilot, he flew 200 different aircraft that pushed the limits of speed and altitude, including the legendary X-15 high over the California desert. He reached a speed of more than 4,000 miles per hour, and he took the needle-nosed X-15 to the edge of space. Armstrong's steady hands as a test pilot were instrumental to the success of NASA's first Mercury astronauts, and soon he would become one of them. In 1962, he was chosen for NASA's astronaut training program in Houston. But it was at this point that his wife Janet lost their second child, 2-year-old daughter named Karen, to an inoperable brain tumor. To avoid letting the grief take over, Armstrong buried himself in his work, preparing for the Gemini program, which was NASA's next step toward reaching the moon. In 1966, he was chosen as the command pilot for the Gemini 8 mission, the first time that NASA astronauts would attempt to connect 2 spacecraft in orbit. This was a difficult and dangerous maneuver known as rendezvous and docking. Armstrong and his co-pilot, David Scott, successfully docked with an unmanned aerial target vehicle, but soon after their spacecraft began to spin uncontrollably due to a malfunctioning thruster. He eventually managed to stabilize the Gemini 8 by using the re-entry control system, but they had to abort the mission and make an emergency landing in the Pacific Ocean. It was a close call, but Armstrong's calmness and quick thinking came to their rescue. His next and final mission was the one that would immortalize him forever. He was chosen as the commander of Apollo 11, the first manned mission to land on the moon. How did man get to the moon? What struggles did they face on their sojourn to the moon? What could have gone wrong and what went wrong? Let's find out. The flight to the moon. The initial crew assignment of Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot, CMP, Jim Lovell, and Lunar Module Pilot, LMP, Buzz Aldrin on the backup crew for Apollo 9, was officially announced on November 20th, 1967. Lovell and Aldrin had previously flown together as the crew of Gemini 12. Due to design and manufacturing delays in the LM, Apollo 8 and Apollo 9 swapped prime and backup crews, and Armstrong's crew became the backup for Apollo 8. Based on the normal crew rotation scheme, Armstrong was then expected to command Apollo 11. There would be one change. Michael Collins, the CMP on the Apollo 8 crew, began experiencing trouble with his legs. Doctors diagnosed the problem as a bony growth between his fifth and sixth vertebrae, requiring surgery. Lovell took his place on the Apollo 8 crew, and when Collins recovered, he joined Armstrong's crew as CMP. In the meantime, Fred Hayes filled in as backup LMP and Aldrin as backup CMP for Apollo 8. Apollo 11 was the second American mission where all the crew members had prior spaceflight experience, 54 the first being Apollo 10. The next was STS-26 in 1988. Deke Slayton gave Armstrong the option to replace Aldrin with Lovell, since some thought Aldrin was difficult to work with. Armstrong had no issues working with Aldrin, but thought it over for a day before declining. He thought Lovell deserved to command his mission. The Apollo 11 prime crew had none of the close, cheerful camaraderie characterized by that of Apollo 12. Instead, they forged an amiable working relationship. Armstrong in particular was notoriously aloof, but Collins, who considered himself a loner, confessed to rebuffing Aldrin's attempts to create a more personal relationship. Aldrin and Collins described the crew as amiable strangers. Armstrong did not agree with the assessment and said all the crews he was on worked very well together. On the 16th of July, 1969, the Saturn V rocket took off in Florida, and it was watched by millions of people on television. 4 days later, Armstrong and Aldrin, separated from the command module, entered Eagle and began the final preparations for lunar descent. At 1744, Eagle separated from Columbia. Collins, alone aboard Columbia, inspected Eagle as it pirouetted before him to ensure the craft was not damaged and that the landing gear was correctly deployed. Armstrong exclaimed that the Eagle had wings. As the descent began, Armstrong and Aldrin found themselves passing landmarks on the surface 2 or 3 seconds early and reported that they were long. They would land miles west of their target point. The Eagle was traveling too fast. The problem could have been mascons, concentrations of high mass in a region or regions of the Moon's crust that contains a gravitational anomaly, potentially altering the Eagle's trajectory. Flight director Gene Kranz speculated that it could have resulted from extra air pressure in the docking tunnel or a result of Eagle's pirouette maneuver. 5 minutes into the descent burn and 6,000 feet, 1,800 meters above the surface of the Moon, the LM guidance computer, LGC, distracted the crew with the first of several unexpected 1201 and 1202 program alarms. Inside the Mission Control Center, computer engineer Jack Garman told guidance officer Steve Bales it was safe to continue the descent, and this was relayed to the crew. The program alarms indicated executive overflows, meaning the guidance computer could not complete all its tasks in real time and had to postpone some of them. Margaret Hamilton, the director of Apollo flight computer programming at the MIT Charles Stark Draper Laboratory, later recalled. When Armstrong again looked outside, he saw that the computer's landing target was in a boulder-strewn area just north and east of a 300-foot diameter, 91-meter crater, later determined to be West Crater, so he took semi-automatic control. Armstrong considered landing short of the boulder field so they could collect geological samples from it, but could not since their horizontal velocity was too high. Throughout the descent, Aldrin called out navigation data to Armstrong, who was busy piloting Eagle. Now, 107 feet, 33 meters above the surface, Armstrong knew their propellant supply was dwindling and was determined to land at the first possible landing site. Armstrong found a clear patch of ground and maneuvered the spacecraft towards it. As he got closer, now 250 feet, 76 meters above the surface, he discovered his new landing site had a crater in it. He cleared the crater and found another patch of level ground. They were now 100 feet, 30 meters from the surface, with only 90 seconds of propellant remaining. Lunar dust kicked up by the LM's engine began to impair his ability to determine the spacecraft's motion. Some large rocks jutted out of the dust cloud, and Armstrong focused on them during his descent so he could determine the spacecraft's speed. A light informed Aldrin that at least one of the 67-inch, 170-centimeter probes hanging from Eagle's footpads had touched the surface a few moments before the landing, and he said to contact light. Armstrong was supposed to immediately shut the engine down, as the engineers suspected the pressure caused by the engine's exhaust reflecting off the lunar surface could make it explode. But he forgot. 3 seconds later, Eagle landed, and Armstrong shut the engine down. Apollo 11 used slow-scan television TV incompatible with broadcast TV, so it was displayed on a special monitor, and a conventional TV camera viewed this monitor, thus a broadcast of a broadcast, significantly reducing the quality of the picture. The signal was received at Goldstone in the United States, but with better fidelity by Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station near Canberra in Australia. Minutes later, the feed was switched to the more sensitive Parkes radio telescope in Australia. Despite some technical and weather difficulties, black and white images of the first lunar EVA were received and broadcast to at least 600 million people on Earth. Copies of this video in broadcast format were saved and are widely available, but recordings of the original slow-scan source transmission from the lunar surface were likely destroyed during routine magnetic tape reuse at NASA. A rousing, welcoming return. During the splashdown, Columbia landed upside down but was righted within 10 minutes by flotation bags activated by the astronauts. A diver from the Navy helicopter hovering above attached a sea anchor to prevent it from drifting. More divers attached flotation collars to stabilize the module and positioned rafts for astronaut extraction. On August 13th, the 3 astronauts rode in ticker tape parades in their honor in New York and Chicago, with an estimated 6 million attendees. On the same evening in Los Angeles, there was an official state dinner to celebrate the flight, attended by members of Congress, 44 governors, Chief Justice of the United States, Warren E. Burger and his predecessor, Earl Warren, and ambassadors from 83 nations at the Century Plaza Hotel. Nixon and Agnew honored each astronaut with a presentation of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The 3 astronauts spoke before a joint session of Congress on September 16, 1969. They presented 2 U.S. flags, one to the House of Representatives and the other to the Senate, that they had carried with them to the surface of the moon. The flag of American Samoa on Apollo 11 is on display at the Gene P. Hayden Museum in Pago Pago, the capital of American Samoa. This celebration began a 38-day world tour that brought the astronauts to 22 countries and included visits with many world leaders. The crew toured from September 29th to November 5th. The world tour started in Mexico City and ended in Tokyo. Stops on the tour in order were Mexico City, Bogota, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Las Palmas in the Canary Islands, Madrid, Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, Oslo, Cologne, Berlin, London, Rome, Belgrade, Ankara, Kinshasa, Tehran, Mumbai, Dhaka, Bangkok, Darwin, Sydney, Guam, Seoul, Tokyo, and Honolulu. Joe Rogan's theory of the moon travel. Many have theorized that the moon travel was a hoax, and amongst them is popular podcaster Joe Rogan. According to Rogan, when the United States flag was planted on the moon, it started flapping. There is no wind in space, so why would the flag flap? There is a theory that the flag was attached to a wire and a fan, and that the entire thing was filmed on the Earth. The flag proves that the landing on the moon was a hoax planned by NASA to deceive the public, and also apparently to win the space race against the Soviet Union. There was a space race at that point between the United States and the Soviet, and to establish supremacy, the United States conjured that hoax. Perhaps this is why Neil Armstrong resigned from his duties at NASA after that. In a crazy turn of events, a former employee of Rocketdyne, the company that built the Saturn V rocket's engine casing, claimed that he had insider information that the moon landing was fake, and the flag was one of the many clues that exposed the fraud. Joe Rogan is not the only conspiracy theorist believed that the moon landing was a hoax staged by the United States in order to win the space race. Questions have been raised about the images that came out after the moon travel. Why were there no stars in the sky? The moon is situated high up in space, so why is it that there were no stars in the images generated by NASA? In one of the pictures from the moon landing, you can see Armstrong clearly reflected in Aldrin's visor. Some skeptics have pointed out that Armstrong does not appear to be holding a camera, so someone else must be taking the picture. Who else went on the trip with them? According to NASA, only Neil Armstrong and Aldrin went on the trip, but this does raise suspicions and questions the credibility of NASA and the United States government. In images from the moon landing, it is possible to see certain objects even though they are in shadow. Skeptics argue that if the sun were the only source of light, this wouldn't be the case. Therefore, the fact that you can see some objects in shadow must be the result of special Hollywood lighting. One of the most famous photos shows a stray moon rock that appears to have the letter C written or stamped on it. This gives off the impression that most of the larger moon rocks seen in pictures from the moon landing are simply props. A set designer could have labeled this stray moon rock with a letter and accidentally left it turned over for the camera to see. Scientists and representatives from NASA claim the C is just a photographic glitch, a stray hair that found its way into the developing process, or a hoax in itself. There's a possibility someone took the original untouched photo and added the C in afterward. But all of these just adds to the questions already raised on NASA's credibility. Some skeptics also raise questions on the lengths of the shadows in the pictures. Some people point out that some of the shadows given off by the astronauts are different in length, even though they might be standing close to each other. This might suggest that a faulty lighting system was set up on a stage somewhere, and NASA failed to notice any inconsistencies. Some skeptics have also pointed out the possibility that in order to create the effect of weak gravity on the moon, the astronauts were carried by thin wires and filmed jumping around. NASA then slowed down the film, according to the conspiracy theorists, in order to make it look like they were floating through the air. Doubters have gone far enough to construct their own wiring systems, film themselves, and slow down the footage to compare it to NASA's video. Joe Rogan is not the first person to doubt the moon landing hoax, and perhaps it was the many doubters before Joe that gave Neil Armstrong a guilty conscience. Perhaps he could not continue with the lie, hence the decision to step away from NASA life after Apollo. What next for Neil Armstrong? Some former astronauts, including Glenn and Apollo 17's Harrison Schmitt, sought political careers after leaving NASA. Armstrong was approached by groups from both the Democratic and Republican parties, but declined the offers. He supported states' rights and opposed the U.S. acting as the world's policeman. When Armstrong applied at a local Methodist church to lead a Boy Scout troop in the late 1950s, he gave his religious affiliation as a deist. His mother later said that his religious views caused her grief and distress in later life, as she was more religious. Upon his return from the moon, Armstrong gave a speech in front of the U.S. Congress in which he thanked them for allowing him to see some of the grandest views of the Creator. In the early 1980s, he was the subject of a hoax claiming that he converted to Islam after hearing the call to prayer while walking on the moon. Indonesian singer Suhaimi wrote a song called Gema Suara Adzan di Bulan, the resonant sound of the call to prayer on the moon, which described Armstrong's supposed conversion, and the song was widely discussed by Jakarta news outlets in 1983. Similar hoax stories were seen in Egypt and Malaysia. In March 1983, the U.S. State Department responded by issuing a message to embassies and consulates in Muslim countries saying that Armstrong had not converted to Islam. The hoax surfaced occasionally for the next 3 decades. Part of the confusion arose from the similarity between the names of the country of Lebanon, which has a majority Muslim population, and Armstrong's longtime residence in Lebanon, Ohio. Armstrong flew light aircraft for pleasure. He enjoyed gliders, and before the moon flight had earned a gold badge with 2 diamonds from the International Gliding Commission. He continued to fly engineless aircraft well into his 70s. While working on his farm in November 1978, Armstrong jumped off the back of his grain truck and caught his wedding ring in its wheel, tearing the tip off his left ring finger. He collected the severed tip, packed it in ice, and had surgeons reattach it at a nearby hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. In February 1991, he suffered a mild heart attack while skiing with friends in Aspen, Colorado. Illness and death. Armstrong underwent bypass surgery at Mercy Faith Fairfield Hospital in Cincinnati on August 7, 2012, to relieve coronary artery disease. Although he was reportedly recovering well, he developed complications and died on August 25, aged 82. President Barack Obama issued a statement memorializing Armstrong as among the greatest of American heroes, not just of his time but of all time, and added that Armstrong had carried the aspirations of the United States citizens and had delivered a moment of human achievement that will never be forgotten. Armstrong's family released a statement describing him as a reluctant American hero who served his nation proudly as a Navy fighter pilot, test pilot, and astronaut. While we mourn the loss of a very good man, we also celebrate his remarkable life and hope that it serves as an example to young people around the world to work hard to make their dreams come true, to be willing to explore and push the limits, and to selflessly serve a cause greater than themselves. For those who may ask what they can do to honor Neil, we have a simple request. Honor his example of service, accomplishment, and modesty, and the next time you walk outside on a clear night and see the moon smiling down at you, think of Neil Armstrong and give him a wink. It prompted many responses, including the Twitter hashtag #WinkAtTheMoon. Buzz Aldrin called Armstrong a true American hero and the best pilot I ever knew, and said he was disappointed that they would not be able to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing together in 2019. Michael Collins said that he was the best and that he would miss him terribly. NASA Administrator Charles Bolden said, "As long as there are history books, Neil Armstrong will be included in them, remembered for taking humankind's first small step on a world beyond our own." In July 2019, after observations of the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, the New York Times reported on details of a medical malpractice suit Armstrong's family had filed against Mercy Health Fairfield Hospital, where he died. Armstrong's wife, Carol, was not a party to the lawsuit. She reportedly felt that her husband would have been opposed to taking legal action. Legacy of Neil Armstrong. Armstrong left his prints in the annals of history, and his legacy is written in gold. Armstrong was elected as a member of the National Academy of Engineering in 1978 for contributions to aerospace engineering, scientific knowledge, and exploration of the universe as an experimental test pilot and astronaut. He was elected to the American Philosophical Society in 2001. Armstrong and his Apollo 11 crewmates were the 1999 recipients of the Langley Gold Medal from the Smithsonian Institution. On April 18, 2006, he received NASA's Ambassador of Exploration Award. The Space Foundation named Armstrong as a recipient of its 2013 General James E. Hill Lifetime Space Achievement Award. Armstrong was also inducted into the Aerospace Walk of Honor, the International Space Hall of Fame, the National Aviation Hall of Fame, and the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. He was awarded his Naval Astronaut Badge in a ceremony on board the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower on March 10, 2010, in a ceremony attended by Lovell and Cernan. The lunar crater Armstrong, 31 miles 50 kilometers from the Apollo 11 landing site, and asteroid 6469 Armstrong are named in his honor. There are more than a dozen elementary, middle, and high schools named for Armstrong in the United States, and many places around the world have streets, buildings, schools, and other places named for him and Apollo. The Armstrong Air and Space Museum, in Armstrong's hometown of Wapakoneta, and the Neil Armstrong Airport in New Knoxville, Ohio, are named after him. The mineral Armstrongite is named after him, and the mineral Armalcolite is named in part after him. In October 2004, Purdue University named its new engineering building Neil Armstrong Hall of Engineering. The building was dedicated on October 27, 2007, during a ceremony at which Armstrong was joined by 14 other Purdue astronauts. The NASA Dryden Flight Research Center was renamed the NASA Neil A. Armstrong Flight Research Center in 2014. In September 2012, The U.S. Navy named the first Armstrong-class vessel RV Neil Armstrong. In July 2018, Armstrong's sons put his collection of memorabilia up for sale, including his Boy Scout cap and various flags and medals flown on his space missions. A series of auctions held November 1st, 2018, realized $5.2 million. As of July 2019, the auction sales totaled $16.7 million. 2 fragments of wood from the propeller and 4 pieces of fabric from the wing of the 1903 Wright Flyer that Armstrong took to the moon fetched between $112,500 and $275,000 each. Armstrong's wife, Carol, has not put any of his memorabilia up for sale. Armstrong donated his papers to Purdue. Along with posthumous donations by his widow, Carol, the collection consists of over 450 boxes of material. In May 2019, she donated 2 25 by 24-inch, 640 by 610 millimeters pieces of fabric from the Wright Flyer, along with his correspondence related to them. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another of our interesting videos.